Hello and welcome to Lazy Reviews. My name is Arvid, and I watch a lot of terrible movies. Sometimes they're good, but honestly, they are more often terrible than not, and today is no exception. Today I will be talking about the Lake Placid franchise. And if my voice is a bit different, it's because I'm ill, but I hope it won't disturb the quality of this too much. I would also like to start out by saying that I will try not to spoil these movies too much, but given that they're so incredibly one dimensional, there won't be much analysis, so it's mostly going to be a plot summary and my thoughts about these movies. There will be a few spoilers about the ending of each movie, because otherwise it doesn't really make sense, because, these are sequels, so they actually do more or less pick up where the previous one left off. But overall, there won't be much to say about these movies other than just giving very brief summary about what's really happening here, with the exception of maybe the first one and the last one, but let's get to that one when we do. Lake Placid came out in 1999 and very much feels like a 90s movie. When you look at the set design, when you look at the lighting, when you look at the cinematography, and especially the sound design, this feels very much like a movie from the 90s. I would actually say it feels a bit more like a movie from the early mid 90s, as I would draw some parallels with Jurassic Park here, and plot wise, I would also have to draw some parallels to Jaws. This movie really reminded me of that, and I think one way you can also really tell that it's a product of the 90s, well, this concept actually went into the 2000s as well, is that it is a horror movie, but it doesn't really want to be a horror movie. So it's trying to be comedic all the time. It's not exactly a comedy horror or a parody horror, but there's not just one comedic relief character. Everybody are trying to be comedic reliefs all the time, maybe with the exception of our lead character, who is just a blank, shallow shell of a person. She has very little agency in this movie, and she just is quite insufferable, to be honest. So yes, it does have a female lead, but she's not leading anything really. She might chime in on a few things, but usually she's just the damsel in distress, or the very privileged New York girl who is just horrible in all the scenes. You very quickly get an idea that she's privileged, self-centered, and hates everything that's just remotely smells of corn and countryside. She's really not. I really don't like her in this movie. Maybe I'm too harsh on her, but that's my impression of her. Not really that the other characters are that much better, but they're at least more. I wouldn't say they're that one dimensional. At least they get a bit more to do in the movie. They get, some of them go through a small transformation. Those things that actually you have a chance to fall in love with the other characters more so than you do with the lead. Not that you do, because this is not a good movie, but at least I think the way the movie is built, the way it is structured, you get more empathy, more understanding of the other characters than you do of the lead. And I do want to emphasize that it is a horror movie. In the opening scene, you see a man bitten in half with his intestines flowing out. Well, they're not falling out, but they are dangling out of his torso. You also have a gross out scene of a detached toe, or a toe that has been bitten off, and it's infested with lava and maggots and that sort of thing. So it has a few horror elements, but it's essentially trying to be a family movie. If you listen to the music that's almost taken out of Jurassic Park, or if you just look at all the forced jokes that are in this movie and none of them land, I didn't laugh a single time. This is really not a good comedy if you want to view it as a comedy. But I guess I should start with the plot. This is the only movie I probably have a lot to talk about, so this movie might alone take 50% of this video's length. So it takes place in Lake Placid, Maine, which already confuses me because there is a Lake Placid in the state of New York, not in the state of Maine. So I guess moving it to Maine is to make it more isolated, more provincial. Or maybe it's because they just liked Stephen King and wanted to put it in Maine. That's also an option. I the film is filmed in British Columbia, so Canada. I haven't been to Maine and I haven't been to British Columbia, but actually, the reason I'm mentioning this is The location changes in every single movie, and it is a bit frustrating. And I would say that this first location they have is actually quite well. It has almost what looks like a mangrove forest. It has all these. It has a lot of underwater shots that are actually quite effective because you do see these divers in the lake. But yeah, of course, this guy is attacked, and next scene is our lead character, who is a paleontologist who works in New York at a museum. I forgot which one. I should say New York City. And she's in this weird situation where she was dating her boss, who now instead just dumped her in the favor of one of her coworkers, and she's torn up about it. It's not really used well in the movie. I think it's just to give her a reason to be a bit unhinged, to be a bit mad and self-centered. But it's really not brought up at any point other than this opening scene. There's no other reason for it. So it's a very weird establishing thing. It's not terrible. It's just it's not really used that much other than the reason why. So there's been this attack where they think that the teeth they found looked a bit prehistoric, so that's why they could find a paleontologist to come and help them. Again, it's a very contrived plot in that sense, but there is a meaning to it because the lead character at least believes that the reason why she's sent there is because the boss and his new girlfriend, the co-worker, they want her out of the picture so they can continue that romance without any weird feelings at the workplace. Which, okay, if that's what the intention of that build setup, that's not a terrible payoff. But what I have to say about this scene is, so our lead character is a quite young, I would say, objectively attractive woman. The co-worker that is now sleeping with the boss is an attractive woman. The boss is a stereotypical 90s nerd, old as well. There's nothing about this romance I buy. Not that I think maybe the joke is that in all other realms, this nerd would be a very unattractive guy who wouldn't get any women. But because he's surrounded by lady nerds, even though they're attractive lady nerds, which yeah, that's a thing, he can pull. But if that's what the intention is, they made him a very bad character because he has no spine. He can't stand up for himself. He can't communicate. So he's not even. It's not just that he looks like a nerd and has a nerd hobby, but it's actually a guy with a backbone who has other attractive qualities to him. But no, they just kind of demolish him as a masculine character. And therefore it doesn't really make sense why these two women are obsessed with him because they apparently are. I might be putting too much into this, and I don't want to nerd shame anything because I know that it's not completely unrealistic what's happening here. I just think from a movie perspective, this is a very weird setup that could have been used for more purposes because it's established later that this lady is actually attracted to traditionally masculine men. That's all the attraction she finds in other men in this movie. So why was she attracted to this guy? Anyway, a very long build up. So she comes to this town. She is not that happy. She keeps telling everybody in this town that they are hicks, that they have no culture, that she's really not placed to be outside New York City. And of course, everybody, all the local people, kind of dislike her for being a snob because she is a snob. She's not. She's a terrible person. She is the kind of person where if you met her at a dinner party, you would just find the place furthest away from her in the room and hope she would not approach you. That's the kind of person she is. She gets a bit more of human quality towards the end of the movie, but not really a lot. It's just more that other people are superseding her in terms of leading roles. So she's just so much in the background that it doesn't really matter that she's not a likable person. So the other main characters there are is the you have the local sheriff who is yeah, he's supposed to be a redneck basically. Then you have some guy from I think the Department of Wildlife, Fish and Wild or whatever it's called, who is also involved because this thing involves animals. And they have to save this small community, which I think is not just. So that's why it also has Jaws elements, that this is not just a small town. but a town where its tourist industry relies a bit on this young people being able to go to that beach during the summer at that lake. At least that's what the other movies build on. This movie doesn't establish that much. We don't really see the town that much. You just see them in the campsite near the lake most of the movie. And then they try to figure out. You see a lot of scenes where they're diving, where they are taking boat rides on the lake, where they are investigating. So the only person living next to this lake is this old lady, played by a very famous actress who died not too many years ago, and I unfortunately forgot her name. She's normally quite a good character actor. She's normally quite adorable. In this movie, she's really annoying, but that's because she's. This movie thinks it's funny to have old ladies say dirty things. So she says fuck and cocksucker and all those things, and that's supposed to be funny. It's also supposed to be funny that she's very honest about murdering her husband, because her first story is that he was ill and wanted to euthanasia, basically, and she just did it at home. And later it turns out that he actually was eaten by the evil entity in this movie, and the evil entity is a crocodile. It's a huge crocodile. So he was eaten by that by accident, from what I gather, because they used to feed these crocodiles. That they've been feeding the crocodiles for 6 years. That's established later in the movie. Around this time, we have our fourth leading character introduced, who is this crocodile expert. So that's when they realize it's a crocodile, and he's a weirdo. He is a bit of a hippie. He is a happy-go-lucky guy, but also a psycho, in that he behaves very inappropriately towards other people. He starts fights all the time. And there is a scene where it's established that he believes crocodiles are divine links to the gods. That is a spirit animal. And that's why he loves them. He basically praises them like gods. That's such a weird thing. And it's so weird that actually, as a concept, I kind of like the movie for doing that. And I should say that nobody's really likable in this movie. Even the sheriff, who is kind of being redeemed throughout the movie, he's still also not. He's too suspicious of people outside the town. He is too anti-elite or anti-cosmopolitan to be that charismatic. He is just a bumbling idiot in most of the scenes. And although he does go from wanting to kill the crocodile to wanting to save it towards the end, he is still not really having any likable qualities. It's not that they're all insufferable, but they're also not likable. You don't really care about them. That's the point I'm trying to come across. And yes, then it's basically just building towards this final showdown, where of course most of the movie is just this dynamic between the group where nobody likes each other and they have to find something that works. Or that I should say that the crocodile expert is a friend of the New York girl, and there is a romance between the New York girl and the guy from Fish and Wildlife. So those are the dynamics, and they have to find a way to work together to bring down this evil entity. And it all culminates in this final scene shot at night, or in the dark, where they have to lure the crocodile out with a cow suspended from a helicopter. That's actually a bit cool. Also, it turns out that the crocodile guy can fly a helicopter, so that's a very fortunate trait to have in this situation. And then the other ones are on the shore, all ready with tranquilizer guns to take out the crocodile when it emerges. And that's it. And of course, I won't say exactly how it ends, but there is not post-credit, but right after everything is over, the plot has been resolved. You see the old lady feeding a bunch of baby crocodiles. So there's already created this idea that there will be a sequel, which was quite common back then, and I guess it's still common now, that you do have this cliffhanger, so you can build a sequel on this concept. The positives, I will say, the crocodile is fine. It's actually, some of the times it's a puppet, and some of the times it's CGI, but not terrible CGI. Of course, it didn't age well, but this is from 1999, and it actually looked quite okay for its time. That looks honestly quite good. Especially there's some underwater scenes that are a bit suspenseful. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's all the positive thing I can say. There are some fine establishing shots. And I said, the sound design, the music used in the movie is not bad in its own right. It's just really weird choice of sound design for a horror movie. That's all the positives. So all the negatives, mostly is just a very very boring movie. But the reason why I ended up really disliking the movie is that it's constantly trying to be funny and not trying to be serious about anything. That's what I really dislike about this film. Um, it also has some absolutely terrible dialogue where when their boat is out on the lake and something kind of falls into it and it starts tipping over or rocking a bit in the water, someone says, "What was that?" Another person answers, "I don't know." And then it happened again. And what happened? And the other guy says, "I don't know." This dialogue is just the most lazy dialogue you could expect from anything. There's also, I think this is the worst line of dialogue in the movies. Someone is saying, "Look how flat that water is. Look how flat the water is. Look at how flat that water is." I guess he means that it doesn't have waves, but it's a lake. I know lakes also can have waves. It's a small lake. What does that mean? What does that mean? How is that lake different from other lakes? It makes no sense. This is such a stupid movie. Oh, yeah, and there's even another scene with a very bad dialogue where one of the deputies gets eaten. I think it's the first person to be eaten after the intro. And this guy comes up comforting the sheriff saying, "Oh, I'm sorry that he died. He was a good man." And the sheriff's reply is just, "Yep." No emotion. I get that he's kind of supposed to be this traditional conservative man from the countryside who doesn't show emotion, but even then, it's a poor delivery. There's no real excuses for this movie. There's no reason to watch this. I think I would say it's not a terribly made movie. On paper, or if you just look at the shots from it, the underwater scenes are generally quite well done. The problems with it are the attempts at constant comedy and the fact that it's really really boring. That's and the bad writing, of course. But other than that, it's not a bad looking film, and I'm stressing this because the rest of these movies are god awful. It's difficult to say that they are worse, but they are. But most of them are actually still as entertaining as this one is, or the lack thereof. So Lake Placid 2 came out in 2007, quite a long time after the first one came out, to be honest. The first movie was not a huge success, but with a budget of upwards to $35 million dollars and a box office of $57 million, dollars, it was not a flop either, and it might have spawned enough of a cult following to create this sequel. The problem is the sequel only had a budget of $2 million. dollars. So, of course, the quality of it will be thereafter. And to make it cheaper to produce, they moved the production to Bulgaria. And for that reason, the surroundings look quite different than in the first one. Honestly, it doesn't look too different, but you can tell it's a different lake. You can tell that the surrounding nature, that the trees are different, the plants are different. It really doesn't look like the place in the first movie. And if you're not too distracted from that, is there anything else to enjoy about this movie? No, not really. The sound design is even worse and even more like a kid's movie in this one. It's also still, it doesn't look terrible. The camera work, the editing, everything is still actually not awful. It's mediocre at best, but it looks old. So the thing is, the movie looks like it could have been made in 1999 as well. And if you look at this, if you check the sound design, if you check everything, it sounds like it should have been made at that time, and probably not in 2007, which also is a bit weird when you think about it. That it feels so dated. Again, that's actually true for all these movies that come out after this. They all feel very, very, very dated. And I think the biggest culprit here is the crocodile. So the plot of this movie is that the three crocodile offspring, I don't know what you call a crocodile baby. So the three that survived the first film have now grown old and start terrorizing this community again. The old lady died, and was replaced by her sister. Of course, the house is different, it doesn't look like the same place at all. It was replaced by her sister, from what I gather. And although the old lady in the first movie was annoying because of what dialogue she was given, this lady is just thoroughly despicable. There's nothing about her character that's interesting. She's supposed to be funny. She isn't. She is a murderer, a monster, and she doesn't get any comeuppings. And there's just no real. There's nothing to like about her. She's so terrible. Just even seeing her face for the first time and how she responds to the officer in question, or the sheriff who's questioning her, that's just, you already know that this is a stinker. This is not good. This is not going to be good. But that's the plot. So people start dying. They're doing some research in the lake. This sheriff and his son, who are both, oh, they are so 2007. You just seeing the clothing of the son really ages this movie. Really dates it. The son himself is just a really blank slate of a character. He's not likable at all, but he's also not dislikable. The father, though, who's playing the sheriff, is a monster. He is a no-nonsense, full of himself machismo guy who is just being toxic throughout the whole movie, that you're supposed to root for him, but he's being an asshole throughout the whole movie, and you just want to see him die, but instead he gets the girl. I mean, it's so bad. It's so frustrating to see him in this movie. He's not likable at all. He's supposed to be the charismatic guy, and he's so far from it. And I think that's the worst thing in movies, when you're trying to make a charismatic guy who's ends up being the opposite. That really hits hard. That really is detrimental to the quality of the film, to the viewing experience of the film. So with such a low budget, we also get a very low budget CGI monster. There are no more practical effects. Well, there are some gore effects, but aside from those, the practical effects are gone, and all we get is a very, very, very bad looking CGI crocodile. I would say we don't see it a lot, fortunately, but we do see it in a few scenes. And when it's lying still, it's passable. No, it's not passable. It was passable for a PlayStation 2 game, I think, not for a movie in 2007. So I should also mention that there are some new characters in this movie. I mean, all of them are new characters. And we do have these two hunters who come in, or poachers who come in to help out the situation. Um, and one of them is played by Zach McMurray, who is normally fairly likable in movies, but in this one he has a terrible accent that really makes it frustrating. He's also an asshole. He treats this African guy as a slave. The African guy has a terrible accent too, by the way. And overall, it's just much worse than the first movie. That should not be that possible, but it is. It's a much worse movie. Again, it's trying to be a comedy all the time. It probably tries even harder, and it tries to make up for the lack of production quality by giving us naked women. That doesn't work. You don't suddenly realize that the movie is not bad just because you see boobs. And of course, it also has the obligatory douche in it. I think what's even more odd about this movie is how it ends. So it ends up, it kind of cuts off mid scene and then ends on a pseudo cliffhanger, and the end credits don't have any music playing. I think that's the first time I've seen end credits without music. That's so weird. It's so weird. Such a weird choice. So no, there's no reason to watch this. It's a very bad movie. Let's move on to the third one. So Lake Placid 3 came out in 2010. This movie has a very simple plot. Not really that dissimilar from the other ones. They also had similar plots. So this family moves to Lake Placid. I think it actually might be supposed to be the house of the old lady that they move into. I didn't realize this to begin with, but it's just watching shots of these houses side by side. It's probably meant to be. It's just because this is again a new filming location, so it doesn't look like the original house. But I think it's intended to be the house where so much shit has already happened. And the father of this new family, it's a father, wife, and son. The father is working for wildlife again, so that's how he gets involved in these things that start to happen around the lake because people start disappearing. The son finds these small crocodile younglings while he's just running around the woods as a kid would do, I guess. No supervision from the parents. And he starts feeding them meat, and he even starts stealing things, trying to steal meat from the supermarket to feed it to the crocodiles. Whenever he tries to tell his parents, he actually tries to warn the parents right away or tell them about these crocodiles. But of course, this is a movie, so every time he tries to say something to them, they either don't have time or they cut him off mid sentence to say what they want to say. Terrible parenting right there. The other plot element of the movie is this college student. His girlfriend went on a camping trip around this area with her new douchebag who's trying to woo her. Turns out that he made a rumor that he was sleeping with another girl, that he was cheating on the girlfriend, and that's how he created some distance between them, some space between them, so he can make his move. So this former boyfriend, he goes to hire a poacher to take out. He says that it's an animal in this area that they need to take out, but it's actually just to have them involved in tracking down the boyfriend, and so he can solve up the issues there. A very contrived plot, honestly. It's talking about terrible writing. This is it. This is really terrible writing. All the characters in this movie are either forgettable or horrendous. There is this actress who's playing the maid, or sorry, the nanny of the kid. I think she's supposed to be Spanish or Hispanic, and all she does is watching soap operas while holding her dog. And I think the irony is the soap opera she's watching, the production design is much better than this movie. That character is terrible. I hated every second with her. Again, I think we're supposed to, but that doesn't help it. If you don't want to watch the movie while she's on screen, yeah, it's just a big issue. And of course, things go wrong. People die. There's a big finale at a convenience store. And that's it for the plot. So the only actress that does have a memorable performance is the same lady who plays the female lead or the female supporting character in Hard Target, a brilliant movie. In this one, the first 5 minutes with her, you might like her. She has this no-nonsense, strong woman. I take what I want charm. She's called the Cougar because she's constantly hitting on all these young men. She has a lot of energy, a lot of power. She's also this, again, quite simple woman in terms of interests. She is certainly from the countryside. She certainly has no interest in anything intellectual. And she's also quipping all the time. She's trying to be a wise guy or wise woman, I guess. The problem is that that's all this woman does. This lady acts like this in the entire movie. And she constantly has a frown. Her facial expression, she only has one facial expression, and it looks like a mean, angry woman who eats nothing but bitter food. It's. Sorry, I wish I could come with a better analogy or a comparison than this, but her facial expression is so terrible. And the reason why this is a problem is this woman is in the next two movies as well. Boy, I wish she wasn't. But it is the only memorable performance, so she does have that going for her. There are some other things I should mention about this. Again, the CGI is absolutely abysmal, and the supermarket itself, nothing looks real about this movie. The town looks fake. The town looked fake in the other movies too. It looked like a movie set. It has a very fake and unrealistic looking supermarket, which sounds weird, but if you watch this movie, I think you would agree. There is this weird scene where a woman gets scared of a deer while she's about to take off her clothes and bathe in this lake, and then she turns around and gasps and says, it is another one of those deer things." Again, just terrible dialogue. Yeah, again, the acting is terrible, and there are a lot of fake jump scares. So no, don't watch this one. Should you watch the fourth one? I don't think you should, but let's find out. So Lake Placid 4, or Lake Placid the Final Chapter, came out in 2012. In this movie, the lake has been turned into a wildlife preservation, and it's been sealed off with an electrical fence to keep them in and to keep humans out. The poacher is now working. She works at guarding this place, kinda. It's not really. I don't think it's well established what she's doing, but she's helping the local sheriff and everything with keeping this place in order. They're also talking about expanding this place, this fence. And you have the new two leads, who is one of them is the sheriff, and you have a guy who is probably again working for the wildlife. It's not really. I don't really know what he worked at. Honestly, these things don't matter that much. But those two get off having a romance. There are two children. One of them is working at the fence, setting it up and protecting it. He is quite unattentive, so he is inadvertently causing some of the things that happen in this movie. The woman has a daughter who is going on a trip to the lake. Well, she's supposed to go to another lake with her school, but they end up going on a camping trip to this lake by mistake. And this is where the plot is really contrived and where it really should have done with some better writing. Because the only reason why they end up at the wrong lake is because they drive at night. It's not that far away. They shouldn't be driving at night in the first place. They're driving at night. The bus driver arrives there because he is all the time in the bus while driving it. He's looking on his phone, seeing not a naked woman, but a woman in her underwear dancing around. That's what he looks at for so long and so intensely that he doesn't realize that not only does he take the wrong turn, he also drives through an open gate in this area. And the reason why this gate is open is because the third plot element, one of the people working for the sheriff's department or for this wildlife preservation, he takes a bribe and lets in all these poachers so that they can hunt down this crocodile. And that's the plot. You have all these things going on. The poaching lady is still insufferable. She's terrible in all her scenes. Robert England is playing one of the poachers whose plan is to capture some crocodile eggs that he can then sell. Because I forgot to mention this, but in the first movie, it is mentioned that these crocodiles probably just escaped somewhere and made it to Lake Placid in an attempt to go to China, because they are Chinese crocodiles or Asian crocodiles, so they're going to Asia. That's the idea in the first movie. So there's no reason why they ended up in the lake. In the second movie, they ended up in the lake because they were born there. In the third, fourth, and fifth movie, these crocodiles are in the lake because it's the only place in the world where this species exists. So yes, they really just changed the plot there. Anyway, that's why it's so important to preserve these, and that's why their eggs are so valuable. And that's the main plot. Yeah, there's not much more to say about the plot. It's very basic, but I do think this movie works a bit better than the other movies. The CGI is again terrible, but what I do like about it, it does introduce gore again a bit more. It does introduce it's more grisly. It has slightly more interesting characters. It just more happens in this movie. It's definitely not a good movie, but I think it is definitely better than the previous two movies in the series, and probably also the next two movies in the series. That's not saying a lot. It's still a terrible movie. I should also mention that this movie has green vision, meaning that it shifts to the POV of the crocodiles, who apparently see everything in a green tint and a blurry tint. That's not really that nice. That's not really pleasant to watch, but it is at least a new idea. It also has constant jokes about who the hell reads, why would you read, nobody reads these days, and all these jokes about Heart of Darkness. Or not really jokes, it's just people bringing up that book because that book is apparently very important because people know it. Again, terrible thing. It also has one of the worst movie tropes with no time to explain. And this is actually one of those jokes I forgot to mention when in my in my scary movie review, where a guy says, "There's no time to explain, come with me." And then someone steps into the scene and says, "We're being attacked by aliens." And the dad replies, "Oh, that pretty much sums it up, thank you." So, usually when when people say there's no time to explain, it would have taken as much time to say actually what was going on as it did saying there's no time to explain. One of the worst movie tropes there is. when I didn't criticize it as much as the other movies, it really doesn't mean that it's a good movie. So Lake Placid 5, or rather Lake Placid versus Anaconda, that came out in 2014, is a crossover between this franchise and the Anaconda franchise. And this is by far the worst movie of all the six Lake Placid movies, no doubt about it. It opens in this secret lab in a truck where Robert Englund is getting paid for giving some codes to this secret operatives guy in a military uniform, and they're experimenting on anacondas and crocodiles in this lab, and things go wrong. So they drive through the gate to the wildlife preservation. I think that's the one that tried to give them codes for the gate, and yes, that's how it starts. It blows up, and of course, it blowing up leads to police investigation. The new sheriff is played by the poaching lady again. Unfortunately, she's again terrible. I'm sad to say that she's again in the movie. Maybe even worse, her lead deputy is played by this bumbling buffoon that nobody likes, and then she doesn't like. So I don't understand why they work with him and why she puts him on the most important cases. Again, really big plot hole right there. What else? So the reason why there was this research being done is because this corporate lady of this evil place that looks very evil, but you don't see much of it, but it looks evil from just what you see. Her father conducted some experiments on this anaconda species to give humans immortality. It's just that the gene is incompatible with humans. But apparently, she found out that this one species of crocodile, the Lake Placid crocodile, if you combine it with that DNA, it will be compatible with humans and you will be immortal, and you can then sell that. So that's the reason why this whole thing started. So the main victims in this movie is a group of sorority girls, fraternity girls, where this absolutely terrible human being is just humiliating all these girls to try and get them incorporated into the sorority. And you really don't care about these people, so that's why they're there. You want them to die, you especially want her to die. But every single scene of this is insufferable. And once all those are dead, or most of them are dead, and you can then shift focus to something else, it's mostly just the soldier guy, the weird corporate woman, the poacher turned sheriff, and a few other characters just walking around. They're just walking around the forest with weapons. They're walking around here. Oh, there's an anaconda and a crocodile. They're walking over here. Oh, there's another anaconda and a crocodile. They walk over here. Oh, there's something else. I should also mention that this has the worst acting. I'm really sure this has the worst acting of all of them, and that's not saying a lot. But honestly, there's nothing more really to say. This is such an awful movie, and I hated every second of it. Meaning that we're finally at the goal of the final movie in the franchise so far, Lake Placid: The Legacy from 2018. And this movie has nothing to do with the other movies. And I'm honest, it doesn't. It has nothing to do with the other movies. It's set somewhere that doesn't look like the original lake. You don't know if it's still Maine or if it's somewhere else. It's in a secret military facility or lab that has nothing to do with the other movies. There's no town. The electrical fence is no longer there. You have this cover-up story that there has been a radioactive spill in this area 25 years ago. So our leads are all human rights activists, or more probably animal rights activists, from what I gather. And from one of their competitors slash friends slash whatever, they heard a rumor that there was something going on this island, and that they had already that group of people had already gone there to investigate. So they decide to go there, and they get some hired help to help them break in, because of course these animal rights activists are in cahoots with all sorts of criminals, and we're supposed to like them all because that's just the kind of people they are. And that's the plot. They go there, they investigate this lab. There's a crocodile. That's the plot. What else is there to say about the movie? I think this movie did some things right that the other ones just didn't do. Most of it is shot in the dark, meaning that when you do see a terrible CGI crocodile, you don't see much of it. A lot of it is actually just people being killed and snapped without seeing the monster. Normally that's not good in movies, but I think it does work better if you don't have the budget to actually create this either real effects or just proper CGI and have to do something else, it's not a bad idea to just do things off screen or half off screen and that sort of thing. It still looks very cheap. It still has no redeeming qualities. Its plot is way more intricate than it should be, and is such run by the mill number. Mad scientist experiments gone wrong. Something about military. You have heard this story a million times, and that's why having this as a plot might make it even worse than if it didn't even try to have a plot. But I do think that some of the scenes are more effective. Much of the time, honestly, you don't know what you're looking at because it's so dark. But I think it's slightly more pleasing to the eye. The acting might be slightly more acceptable, not good, but acceptable, than the last many movies. That this one is not so bad that I wanted it out of my face. It's just so boring that I couldn't care about anything. And that's it. We had to go. I talked about all of them. All 6 movies, all utter garbage. And yes, that's my wrap up comment. Should you watch any of these movies? Hell no, you should not watch any of these movies. They're not equally bad. The first one, despite its production value, is still a terribly boring movie, and there's no reason to watch it. And all the other movies are just ugly and terrible with bad acting, no redeemable qualities. They are, of course, they're not equally bad, but the deviations in quality is nothing really to encourage you to watch any of them. They're all still very, very, very bad. I didn't write that in-depth reviews of these movies, but still you can check out the written reviews on my Letterboxd profile, The Robot Quits, where you can also stay up to date with what movies I'm watching if you're interested in maybe getting an idea of what series might be coming next. And that's it. I'm finally done with these movies. I can move on with my life. Have a nice day.